You're tuned in to tomfoolery.
We're waiting for Michael right now. So in the meantime, we're going to go ahead and take phone calls from anybody who'd like to jump in. And in the meantime, Joe, if you want to go ahead and just kind of explain what your stance is, uh, feel free to do that.
Well, I think my stance is fairly simple. My stance is that the Second Amendment is worded in such a way that even the forefathers knew it had to be regulated. Additionally, it makes you wonder why the forefathers did not write laws around the internet or cell phones. It's because that technology did not exist back then. I can guarantee you that none of the forefathers foresaw anything other than a musket or a musket type weapon. Okay, so the Second Amendment reads, a well-regulated militia is needed. And I'm not disputing that. Most people who are for gun control don't dispute that you cannot be an unprotected society. However, our forefathers did not really plan on a gun that could kill 45 people in a minute or 2 minutes. I mean, it just didn't exist there. So I'm not a teetotaler. I don't say no guns. I say guns in the right hands. So some other countries that allow their citizens to carry guns, for instance, Switzerland, you can own a gun, but you're also required to complete military service in which you're thoroughly trained in the use of the gun. In our society, there's some instances where there's no training necessary to own a handgun, which in my view is ridiculous. You have to prove you can drive a car before you get a license. You have to prove you can fly a plane before you can fly a plane. But in America, you can run out to a Walmart and pick up a rifle. It doesn't make any sense.
All right. Well, real quick, before we move on to training, when it comes to what kind of, whether or not there are regulations, there's obviously regulations on a lot of guns. So you can't own like machine guns. They got rid of Tommy guns. They got rid of lots of sorts of guns. But it wasn't specifically just for a militia, right? They're like, we see lots of letters back in the day where boats captains were asking, can I have a cannon on my boat? And they said, well, yeah, of course you can have a cannon on your boat. It's the Second Amendment. It explains all of that in there, saying that you are able to own guns. And so they weren't just saying, not only real little, not dangerous types of guns. They were very broad in the types of ammunition and guns and firearms that you were allowed to own, right?
I didn't follow that.
Okay, so there's lots of letters from back in the day where we can see people asking the government if they were allowed to have cannons on their boats. Cannons would fall under the Second Amendment, and that was pretty much their answer, is of course you can have cannons on your boats or on your ships. That we have the Second Amendment saying that you can have a cannon on your ship, and okay, so that would be a type of firearm, right?
I do not follow that a cannon equals a handgun. I also don't follow that you're talking back in the day. I'm assuming the early 1800s, late 1700s. Cannons also took a good 2 to 3 minutes to load. You weren't going to kill dozens of people with the pull of a slight pull of a trigger. So I don't know how that correlates, but I too, as a government official, would have granted them a license to have a cannon. Piracy was rampant back then. You had to protect yourself and your cargo.
It wasn't the fact that they granted them access to a cannon. It was their answer. Their answer specifically said, the Second Amendment already says that you can own a cannon. Of course, you don't have to ask us permission. And so I don't think that a cannon is the same as a handgun either, but that's my point, is that they had these large firearms that they were obviously allowed to use. Now, it does say well-regulated militia in the Second Amendment. And so I think that that's what we normally use to say that we need to kind of pick and choose what firearms are allowed and what firearms aren't allowed, right?
No, a well-regulated militia means someone in charge, that there is a regulations around a militia. Militia also assumes that you're a group of people that have been trained. So yes, the Second Amendment does say a well-regulated militia is required, is needed, it's necessary. These people had just been through a huge revolution that they were in the middle of it when it was written. But again, it took 1 minute to reload a musket and another 20 seconds after that to fire it. So trust me, you had time to run in with a bayonet and get rid of them. Our forefathers could not fathom any handgun or machine gun or weapon that you carry, right? That you can carry into a movie theater, into a school full of 6-year-olds, and pull a trigger, and that one trigger fire 50 rounds, right? Done. Wiped out 50 people, assuming they have decent aim. They couldn't fathom it. It would be like me asking you to write a law about something that exists in 2318. You don't know what kind of technology is there. So if we try to equate what they wrote then to what we have now, it's illogical and dangerous.
Sure, but machine guns are already illegal. Things that shoot more than one bullet, as far as I understand. One pull of the trigger, one bullet is pretty much the way the laws go currently, right?
No.
So what machine guns or guns that are able to rapid fire are currently legal?
I would have to research that. But basically, each state, and in some cases, each principality or city in the United States can make their own gun laws. So let's take a look at Chicago, because I know this is coming up. And I'll do my research on the handguns, but I don't know what you think these people are using to kill the people, to kill dozens of people in El Paso, Texas. And I really don't think that we have to name names of guns. I have frankly not cared about owning a gun myself. I've made it 52 years without the need for a gun. But what we want to look at mainly is, because I know it'll come up later, if we regulate guns in a city, say Chicago, and Chicago has gun regulation, but they also have the largest amount of shootings. And people are like, see, it doesn't work. And that's not the case. The case is that in Chicago, you can drive an hour outside of Chicago and pick a gun up at a Walmart. Okay. So in the United States, we need strict gun laws on a national level. That's the only way it's going to work. So
yeah, but again, there's not guns that release numerous bullets at a time. As far as I understand, there are no rapid fire guns that are currently legal under federal laws. Now, states can go ahead and play with what single fire guns are allowed currently, but there aren't like submachine guns that are currently legal. As far as I know, the last one I believe that was legal was the Tommy gun that Dillinger and all of them used. And by the time they killed all of them off, all of those guns were gone. And now I think that, and that's, I don't know that for sure, but that's from my understanding and what I've heard and seen on the subject, that, machine guns and rapid fire guns aren't currently legal. Now,
so Georgia allows possession of a machine gun, and this is dated October of 2018. Georgia allows the possession of a machine gun if it is registered as required by federal law. Federal law requires that the machine gun be registered with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and generally prohibits the transfer of the machine gun. But as a rule, it ATF finalized a rule to include bump stocks within the definition of machine gun subject to this law. So basically, you can own it, but you have to register it.
Okay. Again, for anybody watching, we're taking calls right now. We're waiting on our Second Amendment side of the debate to jump in. So we'll go ahead and take our first call. It'll let you know when you're on. So we'll go ahead and take our first caller now. Caller, go ahead, and what's your name?
My name's Marty.
All right, what did you have to say?
So it seems to me that there's a slippery slope when we start taking away guns. We end up doing what Australia did. They took away all guns a few years ago. And New Zealand tried to do the same, but it didn't work out because they did not have a registry. Here in America, I believe we have a registry. Guns have to be registered. I don't know. I don't own a gun, so I don't know my greatest fear is a government that would become dictatorial and would take away our guns. And it seems to me that was the biggest concern of the founding fathers, is that we have a way to defend ourselves against the government. And therefore, it's like having an automobile. There are going to be accidents and deaths, and the same with airplanes. There are going to be accidents and deaths, and you can't avoid it. But the other extreme is that we are disarmed, and the government then comes in and overruns, and we have no recourse. We have no defense. So where do we draw the line? How do we know how far to go?
Well, Joe, if you want to go ahead and respond, he wants to know where we draw the line as far as what guns we do and don't take away, and how, and whether or not it's still an issue on whether or not you think the government could become radical or tyrannical and try to do things that we wouldn't want them to do.
Your name is Marty?
Yes.
Marty's hit the nail on the head. So the main concern of the founding fathers was a government that was dictatorial, coming to take our rights away. So I want to clarify something up front, because I think Marty also hit on one of the main areas of miscommunication between those of us who want gun control and those of us who are Second Amendment. And a number of right-wing websites will tell you that we want to take your guns away. That is not the case. That is 100% not the case for most people who are proponents of gun control. But like any side, we have radicals. Oh, we don't want any guns in the United States. That's not fathomable, okay? I believe that guns have a place in America for home protection. So Marty, my point about needing them to fight the government, though, that's a little far-fetched, because if the United States Army came down on your house, your handguns aren't going to save you. If the SWAT team came, your handguns aren't going to save you. You would literally have to band together with everyone in your city and organize yourselves into a militia, which is what the founding fathers saw. And frankly, knowing the level of training most people have to go through before they can suffer through the rapid fire and the noise of battle, it's illogical to think that handguns could be used against our government. So you mentioned that there's deaths from airplanes and accidents. So yes, there have been a few accidents happen, but I'll guarantee you that it was no accident when the gentleman walked into the Walmart in El Paso. That was not a whoopsie moment. He walked in there to kill people. He walked in there to kill Mexicans who were coming to invade our country. Okay, That's not an accident and is not equatable at all to accidents on airplanes. Those are accidents. See, pointing a gun at someone and pulling the trigger is not an accident unless you're a 5-year-old kid who found a gun. That is a tragedy. So you're right, we do need guns. I'm never going to dispute that. What we want on this side is people to get trained on guns, to get licensed on guns, to have background checks on guns. I've known some truly insane people in my life. They're not people I would ever want to have a gun, and yet a couple of them do, because there's not thorough background checks. So in my view, feeling like gun control means someone's coming to take your guns away is also inaccurate, because not many people are proposing a total gun ban. Like I said, with the proper training, the proper documentation, the proper everything, good guys with guns are a good thing. But as the research suggests, there haven't been a whole lot of good guys saving anyone. Good guys with guns don't save a whole lot of people.
Well, with the planes, it's definitely, there are examples of people purposefully killing people with planes as well, not just accidents. But Marty, do you want to respond to whether or not having guns in a civilian's hands is actually going to help the government?
I'll give you my own experience. We lived in New York City for 15 years. Lived in a very, very dangerous area. And on Halloween night, 1989, two guys had a woman in a car outside of our home. They were assaulting her, and she was screaming. And this went on for over an hour. And we called the police numerous times. And the police in that area, a lot of times they would just let things happen, and then they would come mop up. They would, rather than get involved, they would wait around the corner until it was all over, and then they would come and mop up, pick up bodies or whatever. So I got tired of waiting. So I grabbed my gun, and in New York, you're allowed to use a gun inside of a house, but you're not allowed to take it outside the house. So I went down to the street, stuck it in the guy's face, and he put his hands up, and the police were waiting right there. They were right around the corner waiting. And as soon as they saw me stick a gun in the guy's face, three squad cars pulled up, put their guns on me, and arrested me, and put me in jail. And the judge the next day, when I was arraigned, said, "You're going to go to jail for 10 years. So, hope you enjoyed it." But I had not had a gun. I'm not sure what I could have done against two guys with weapons. So, I do not own a gun today, but I do feel like it's such an important right for people to be able to protect themselves. Maybe you say I'm paranoid. I'm really not, but I'm concerned about the government getting too big, and I feel like if the Army, the Navy, whoever, the Marines, or Navy's not coming to my house, but the Marines or whatever came to my house, that if 10,000 people with guns showed up, they'd have a hard time. I'm also concerned about anarchy breaking out if our power grid breaks down, and we then have marauders, going through neighborhoods and breaking in and stealing and taking food and so forth and so on. I feel like everybody needs to be ready to protect themselves, and I haven't come to the point of buying a gun yet, but that time may come, and I want to be able to do it.
Well, real quick, Marty, you could be giving us like half the truth. Did you ever actually get charged with anything when you got arrested for this?
Oh yeah, I was charged with using the gun. Yeah, I didn't go to jail for 10 years. I was charged with using the gun outside of my home, which is illegal in New York City, and the maximum was 10 years. But thank God I had a lawyer who was able to get me off, and I just paid a fine, and that was that.
That's another issue. That's a terrible story, Marty. That's another issue with good guys with guns. Because if you're a good guy with a gun and you're trying to break up a situation where somebody's shooting up a McDonald's and the police come, you're the one with the gun they see, it's likely you're going to get taken down with a bullet or you're going to get in a massive amount of trouble, which is exactly what happened. You know, again, with the proper training or anything like that. But the police are nervous of anyone holding a gun for the very reason that we don't require training on handguns in the United States. Like, frankly, if we didn't have driver's licenses and 5-year-olds could get in cars, I wouldn't be out on the road. So police are nervous when they see a handgun. They're nervous when they think a handgun is present because it's a dangerous weapon, especially in the hands of untrained people.
All right. Well, I appreciate you calling in, Marty.
Thanks, Marty.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Good points. Marty had some really good points.
All right. Next caller. What's your name?
Rose.
You there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Okay. What's your call?
I think she's muted.
No, she's there. I don't know. I can't hear.
Did you hit something accidentally on your phone? We can't hear you if you're speaking.
All right, there we go.
All right. Thank you. So I don't know if you already caught my name, but you already know who I am anyways. But I
Sorry, go
why
ahead.
do you keep muting? Okay. I've heard, obviously by right-wing people, because I lean more towards the right, that statistically guns save more lives than they take them. And I missed a lot of what Marty said, so I don't know if he said any of this or not, but do you think that if more people were carrying guns at the Walmart, then maybe not so many lives would have been lost?
Well, my answer to that is untrained
With proper training.
Yeah, untrained people having guns in that situation that we were in would likely have ended up with more people getting killed, even perhaps someone getting killed by the police who came to help, because police and the actual people trained to help in these situations will not be able to differentiate the good guys with the guns from the bad guys with the guns. So more guns would have equated to more chaos, which would have equated to more deaths.
Okay, but while
on top of that, excuse me, the research by professionals, no matter what right-wing sites are telling you, or right-wing leading people, the research says no. More people with guns does not equate to a safer environment. It equates to a less safe environment.
Okay,
All right,
so
Rose, you have a lot of background noise. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I'm in the car. And the reason I pointed out that I heard that from right-wing sites is because I've never, ever, ever, as much as I also listen to leftist and left-wing people and their podcasts or their YouTube videos, I've never, ever heard them ever say the same thing. I mean, not the same thing, but I've never heard them say the opposite thing. I've never, ever heard somebody say they cause more harm than good.
Okay, well,
They just didn't touch up on that at all. But I agree. I agree that people need proper training. Do you think that if people were required to do like okay, so for example, I have a real estate license. In order to keep my real estate license, I have to do continuing education. I have to continue learning contract law and all the laws that I have to deal with in real estate. And I think I have to take those classes every single year so I can keep my license. If that were the same for guns, like if people they want to own a gun, if they could be required by law to do some sort of continuing education or continuous training throughout the years, then do you think that would be something that might work for our society?
well, then you and I are on the same side. And you're on the same side right now as most Democrats. Though this is not a partisan, by the way, I'm not a Democrat. But that's exactly what we're after. And statistics say, looking at Giffords Law Center, and I looked at Pew Research, but, and this is the simplest way to say it, but having a handgun in the house makes your risk of dying from an unintentional gunshot injury close to 4 times higher if you're living in a home with guns. Unintentional and accidental and even on purpose gun violence is the second leading cause of death of children in this country. Number 2, it's the second leading cause of death of children in our country right now. So no, owning guns does not make you more safe. It makes you a lot less safe. And again, though, if we had the proper training for people who owned guns, that statistic might change. But right now, most people aren't willing to talk about what we can change. And what we can change is training. We can change that you have to train, retrain, get certified, and all kinds of other stuff before owning a handgun. And seeing as how the Second Amendment says a well-regulated militia, maybe that's what they intended all along. Either which way, we're not making ourselves any safer by buying more guns. That's already been proven.
All right, Rose, I appreciate you calling in. We've got our Second Amendment guest. Thanks for coming on, Michael.
Hey, how you doing, Tom?
Doing all right. So we've already kind of, I don't know if you've been listening, we've already kind of stated Joe's views on guns. Do you want to go ahead and kind of lay out what your views are and where you stand?
Yeah, actually, I agree with her on a lot of stuff. Certain things I don't, but I do agree with her on a lot of stuff. First of all, yeah, you should be trained. There's no laws in effect, but responsible gun owners do go get that training, which I, obviously have. I know that it's very easy to say when has a gun saved a life or anything like that, and I can give a personal experience. About 2.5 months ago, I was driving to the gas station at about 9 o'clock at night, and I do conceal carry a pistol pretty much all the time. And when I was driving down the road, I had to slam on the brakes. There was a guy who had a girl in the middle of the street with a knife to her throat. There was actually blood coming down her neck onto her shirt. So I pulled my truck to the side of the road, and I got out, and I yelled, "Hey, what's going on?" And he responded, "Get the F out of here. It's none of your business." And she yelled, "He's got a knife." And I said, "That's fine. I have something a little bit better," which I didn't have to actually present anything at that point. But then he said something along the lines of, "Yeah, right, whatever, there's none of your business, get out of here." So at which point I stood behind my door and I said, "Okay, now there's a pistol in my hand, you need to let her go." So he let her go, and he dropped the knife and he reached for his hip. And when he reached for his hip, I then did present my gun. And I said, drop it now and lay face down, which I made him do. I called the police. It took the police 17 minutes to get there. But he got arrested for attempted murder. He was also a convicted felon, so he also got arrested for unlawful carry of a firearm. So had I not been legally carrying my pistol, I think rather than the outcome being nobody seriously injured and him, being convicted of attempted murder and illegal carry of a firearm, instead there was no injuries, justice was served, nobody got very hurt, where had I not had it, very easily her and I could both be dead.
Well, when we think of a good guy with a gun, you can think of police as well. It's not just some random person walking around. The only difference is police always have a gun on them. Somebody who's walking around on the streets does not always have a gun on them. Even in Georgia, right? I live in Georgia. It is not all that common to see somebody walking around with a gun. You maybe something like 5 to 10% of people are actually going to walk around with a gun. And maybe if more people had guns, even the crazy people who would do something would not be able to do something because there were more people with guns. Now, I'm not pushing for people who have issues to have guns, but I think that, again, if more people had guns and walked around with them, it probably would be a safer area. Like in Texas right now, they have something going on where they're all walking around with rifles on their backs to kind of promote their rights to walk around with guns. So, Joe, what do you think about if more people walked around with guns? What do you think the overall issues with that would be?
Well, chaos, absolute chaos. Like I said, Michael, so for your issue, if said gentleman had a gun, that could have resulted in all three of you dying. Problem is, that man brought a knife to a gunfight, right? You threatened the fact that you had a gun. He had no way of knowing whether you did or didn't, so he made the decision not to attack. Had he had a gun, that might have escalated to the point where 3 people wound up dead instead of that man being arrested. Okay, so I get that. That's a scary story, and it's a good story, right? But since you never had to produce your pistol, just the threat of it was enough to make him drop the knife, so to speak.
Well, actually, could I intervene? Just one thing. He actually did have a pistol. He dropped the knife and then went for his pistol, and before he could point it at me, I then presented mine.
Okay. All right. I missed that part of the story. So either way, that one turned out well. Most stories like that don't turn out that well. Carrying rifles around with you is not a good idea because the human race is the human race. Suicide rates go up. So for instance, if I became suicidal, a handgun's a really easy way to kill yourself. And I don't know if any of you have tried, but it's not really easy to kill yourself. But a handgun makes it easy, right? So you get upset, you have a temporary problem, you can run out to a Walmart, get yourself a gun, and end it all, okay? Not a good idea, because with the right intervention, that person could have been saved. And I have lost friends to this type of suicide. It's not fun. It's not fun to lose these people for no reason. Those of us on this side of it get enraged when shootings like El Paso happen, and with a little bit of gun safety and gun control, that can be prevented. I know it scares a lot of people, but honestly, no one wants to take the guns away. We want people to get the training. I personally think that someone needs a good 40 hours worth of gun safety training, gun training, trauma training. I mean, frankly, if you own a gun, you need to know how to patch up a bullet hole in case somebody gets accidentally shot. if you own a gun, I feel like you need some type of military service where you've gone through some kind of war games where you've got the chaos around you, though it's simulated, so that you understand people don't act rationally in emergency situations. They don't. And they tend to be all about themselves. And like I said, the more people running around in El Paso Walmart with guns, the more people were going to wind up dead because the cops could not have told the difference between the bad guy and the good guys. And they won't stop to ask you. They'll just kill you.
So if we're trying to figure out who should get a gun and who shouldn't get a gun, then Michael, what laws or background checks or types of securities around this should we be implementing to help, or what sorts of laws would you actually be comfortable with?
I'm comfortable with what I consider reasonable gun regulations. I believe that people should have the right to own firearms as long as they haven't lost the right to own firearms. Obviously, if you commit a violent crime, a felony, you lose the right to own firearms. I personally actually train with an Army Ranger, and I do train under stress where you run a half mile, run past the targets from behind, do 20 push-ups, and then stand up, and then he calls out which color targets are the bad guys, and you quickly turn around, and under stress with your heart rate up, you get, it's nothing like the real thing. It's not like being in war. It's not like an active shooting, but you do at least get a feeling for what it's like when your heart's racing. You only have a split second to think. Obviously, it's not life or death, and there's no chance of shooting an innocent person, so you can't simulate it completely. But as far as who should and shouldn't own a gun, I believe people who can pass background checks should be able to own a gun. And I agree a lot with Joe. Just a story, I won't mention my friend's name. I went to a gun show. I've only ever went to one gun show in my life. Being the fact that I have a concealed weapons permit, I don't actually have to pass a background check every time I purchase a firearm, only because background checks are through the FBI, and in order to get a concealed weapons permit, you have to get a background check passed by local law enforcement, state law enforcement, FBI, NICS out of West Virginia. You have to get much more background checks than just to simply buy a firearm. So just presenting the fact that you are, have already passed everything, and obviously if you committed a crime to lose that, they'd revoke that immediately. But when I was there with a buddy of mine, he bought a $3,500 high-capacity rifle, which I own high-capacity rifles, and I'm perfectly fine with that. But because the vendor he bought it from was not a licensed firearms dealer, there's no background check necessary. All he had to do was photocopy his license. Now, to me, that's not enough because, let's face it, kids get into bars every single day at 19 years old and show a fake ID that says that they're 21 and they get alcohol, and that's a problem. But it's not as big of a problem as a felon going in with a fake ID and buying as many guns as he wants without passing a background check. And for all you know, the guy could be turning around selling them at twice the price on the black market to terrorists, whoever. That's obviously an extreme. So I'm not completely against all gun control at all. I firmly do believe that the only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. And I also know that the average response time for police with a shooting is 7.5 minutes, and shootings take a whole lot less time than 7.5 minutes. So generally they show up in time to draw a chalk outline, so that kind of leaves it up to the individual if that chalk outline is going to be around you or around the person who attacked you. So that's kind of my standpoint on it. But again, like I said, I do agree with Joe. I think that things need to be tightened up, loopholes need to be closed. I don't think that just anybody with an ID should be able to go buy whatever firearm they want, and I don't believe for a split second that the idea of to form a militia to overthrow the government, that's got to be the most ridiculous statement I ever heard in my life, because let's face it, it would take 27 of the next most powerful militaries in the world to take down the American military. A whole bunch of guys with very little training with AR-15s or AK-47s or 9mm or whatever it is are not going to stand a chance against tanks, Air Force, nuclear submarines, thousands of troops. Obviously, it would cause nothing except for the U.S. government to decide, do we fire on our own people or not? And anytime a government's ever done that, it's caused civil war. So the idea of raising a militia against your own government is not a good argument.
Well, there's actually two different examples of people who owned a lot of guns and were, stocked up in houses, and FBI and SWAT came to take them, and they held off the FBI for long enough until they had to find new means of intervention because neither side just wanted to, kill everybody. But before I let Joe respond, I want to know specifically what differences in the laws that we have right now, Michael. What's the difference between the laws we have now that you want implemented? What part of the background check is flawed that needs to be added in? Because we do already have background checks, right?
We do have background checks as long as you buy from a licensed gun dealer. If you were to go to a gun shop, you would fill out some paperwork. They would run a background check. The background check would come in either as denied or passed sometime between 10 minutes or up to 2 weeks. If you were to buy a gun from me, I'm not a licensed firearm dealer. So all I have to do by law is make a photocopy of your license or your state ID, any kind of government issued ID. And I think that's wrong. I think that everybody should have to pass a background check to buy any kind of firearm. I think that should definitely go into effect. And I realize that that would cost a lot of lost revenue at these booths that set up at gun shows and sell things for high dollar. A lot of the time, 150% the cost that it would be at a gun shop, simply because people know even if they could legally pass a background check, they're not going to get put on a 2-week hold if they go to a gun show. But the fact of the matter is, it's a loophole around a law that was put in place for a reason. So I do believe that you should have to pass a background check. And I also do believe that you should have to pass tests. Just like if you want to drive a motor vehicle, you have to prove that you can do it safely. I think you should probably also have to prove that you can operate a firearm safely.
Yeah, I think you're an instructor, right? So,
I'm not an instructor. I do train with instructors a lot.
Okay, and so on top of that, I mean, if I died and I wanted to give my guns to my kid or put it in my will when I died, they would be able to take those regardless of their background, right? But the only way that we could stop that was by having a registry of everybody who owns guns. So, Joe, is there any difference in laws implemented or background checks that you would change compared to what he said, and how do you feel about a registry?
So I want to speak to a couple of things. Your mentioning of the standoffs where someone has withheld the U.S. government. I want to point out that those people had hostages, and the government was attempting to save the lives of innocent people, so they didn't blast down the doors or blow the guy up, because innocent people would have lost their lives. So the only way you are going to hold off the government is for a little while, and it's going to be if you have innocent hostages. Otherwise, if you're just in your shack shooting off your guns, you're just going to get taken down if you don't have hostages, right? So those aren't really good examples of holding off the government. But I think Michael also hit the nail on the head with his mention of revenue and lost revenues. This lost revenues and this idea of money and greed surrounding guns in this country is exactly why we've got so many issues. You've got the NRA and gun manufacturers who are profiting a tremendous amount, and they really don't care who's dying because of it. They're out here with these ads in gun magazines and these fake right-wing websites. Oh, they're coming to take your guns. It's so boogeyman-ish, right? So they need to sell you guns. But if we put laws in place where less people have access to guns, that's a whole lot of lost revenue. So right now we've got people sacrificing their lives for the big dollar sign, okay? So then to speak to what I would propose changing is not far off from Michael. I have in the back of my mind two people whose names will go unmentioned. They do live in Georgia, that are clinically insane. And one of them has guns shoved up in his chimney. for some reason. Automatic rifles and weapons, and he's completely insane. And he doesn't buy from anyone where he'd have to register, okay? So one, we need some kind of registry of dangerously mentally ill people, okay? You don't have to get into specifics of their mental illness, but we need to have some registry where if you've gotten certain diagnoses, you don't get access to guns. This private citizen able to sell to private citizen needs to stop. This whole thing about purchasing at gun shows with just a license, and that needs to stop. So we need a thorough criminal background check, and that's just not in the state or locality that you're buying it in. It's a nationwide, because unfortunately here in the U.S. we keep comparing states to states like that's even a comparison. We're all on the same continent. Even if guns were outlawed here in Wisconsin, I could drive a couple hours that way and get myself some guns. So using the state by state comparison is also illogical. You need to look at, for instance, Alaska has one of the highest rates of gun death. Hawaii has, and they have less strict gun laws. Hawaii has strict gun laws and a whole lot less deaths by gun. So not only do the guns keep their citizens safe, but because it's not easy for them to drive over state lines and get guns, also contributes to the fact that they're safer there. So really strict background checks, criminal and mental, are needed. And yes, I realize that's going to cut off a lot of people from getting a gun, but it might mean that little Billy down the street gets to grow up. And I'm all for little Billy down the street. I really don't care if somebody gets their feelings hurt because they can't get a gun. They don't need a gun. They're not going to form a well-regulated militia. They're getting a gun for the wrong reasons, right? So I don't think Michael and I are far off from each other. I think we both agree there needs to be a significant amount more training, much better background checks, and written tests. Okay, a car is a dangerous weapon, but we require people to get licensed. Heck, I even have to register my car. So my car is registered. I'm licensed and tested. I have to go back regularly to get my license updated. And I have to register my car every year. The only reason that isn't already in effect is the lost revenue that would occur if we did that.
All right. Well, real quick, the Bundy standoff was the last standoff that I know of where they had, I believe, about a month-long standoff between the government and a cattle rancher, where eventually they just ended up inviting him to court, and he ended up winning his court case after, holding off the government from his property for about a month. But when I talk about a registry, and I'm wanting to know, Joe, how you feel about a gun registry, meaning that we know exactly every gun that's in the United States and who owns it, because lots of people have issues with that, specifically because if their guns were going to get taken away, I know we've had the conversation about a militia, but say the government did become tyrannical, the first thing they're going to do is they're going to want to take all of your guns away from you so that you can't stop them from doing anything. And so if we had, lots of people keep saying we need to have a gun registry so that we know where all the guns are. If somebody does hand a gun down to their, to their son, or if they give a gun away or something like that, it needs to be in a database somewhere. And everybody says, well, the issue with the database is now they can come and take my guns if they want to. And so when you hear people on the right terrified of them taking their guns, they're worried about a gun registry coming into effect to where the government would know exactly where every gun is. So, Joe, real quick, can you tell me how you feel about a gun registry?
Well, first of all, our government's close to being a dictatorship now and tyrannical. But if you're talking about a government that wanted to take guns away and was serious about it, a registry is not going to make much difference, because in the past, when governments have wanted to outlaw something, they go house to house, right? So unless you're going to hide your guns, they're likely, if they want to take guns away from me, like I might be no different than the guy down the street, but they're going to come in my house, search, and take a gun. So registry might not make a whole lot of difference. If the government gets serious about you not having a gun, then 10 agents show up in the neighborhood, go house to house, and confiscate guns. The registry is not going to make much of a difference. If we're talking about a corrupt government that wants to disarm its citizens, it's not going to look at a piece of paper to decide who's going to get hit, right? Because they're going to think that you hid your gun somewhere else. So they're going to look for the guns, registry or no registry.
Yeah, I guess once tanks come rolling down the road, there's not much you can do about it. So, Michael, then, do you have any rebuttal to that on a gun registry?
Actually, yeah, I do to an extent. All my guns are registered. I'm a law-abiding citizen. As far as gun registry, the problem is just like anything else. Any criminal can get something unregistered. So if the government decided they were going to look on a list and go confiscate every single gun because they have a list, they wouldn't have to confiscate it from me and most law-abiding gun owners. I would turn mine in. I would very sadly turn mine in, but I would turn mine in. The people who wouldn't turn them in would be the meth heads who live about 4 houses up the street from me, who have 2 AK-47s and 2 pistols that I have seen. I've called the police and said, hey, I saw a couple of felons. I know they're not supposed to own anything. And the police said, well, unless we see it ourselves or you have video evidence, there's nothing that we can really do about it. So what it would really do is, I believe it would disarm the law-abiding citizen while leaving the criminals, the gang members, and everybody who shouldn't own guns still armed. And then
I agree with you, Michael, which is exactly why if the government was serious about taking guns away, registry or no registry, they're going to go house to house because they too realize that there's unregistered guns out there. I mean, think about it. If you were in charge and you had to call the order, yeah, the registry is a starting place. It's a jumping off point. But if you were serious about disarming the citizenship, you would not care if they were on a piece of paper or not. You would go house by house by house.
And see, I would rebuttal that by saying even if they went and confiscated every single gun, if there was absolutely 0 guns left in America whatsoever, not a single black powder rifle, not a muzzle loader, not an AR-15, not a pistol, not a revolver, would they outlaw 3D printers also? Because criminals would 3D print guns. Law-abiding citizens wouldn't, and criminals would still remain armed while law-abiding citizens wouldn't. And then if a criminal kicks down your door in the middle of the night and wants to hold your kids at gunpoint or wants to murder you or whatever their intentions are, you're going to be standing there trying to defend your family with a baseball bat while somebody has a 3D printed, possibly fully automatic. The other thing is, when you said about automatic weapons, unless you have a Class 3 license, which means you are a retired ranger or a marshal, you can't own a fully automatic weapon in America. It's a 10-year sentence in federal prison and I believe an $80,000 fine. It's a very, very big thing. And having a bunk stock also now is 10 years in prison, and I forget the fine, but it's a very, very hefty fine. So my thing is, if banning something would keep it out of the hands of criminals, we should definitely consider banning meth.
Banning? Did you say meth?
Yeah, because obviously if you banned it, criminals wouldn't be able to get a hold of it, right?
Yeah, I see your point. Okay, so you're saying obviously meth is already banned and people are doing meth anyways, so it's not going to help to ban guns anyways.
So while I understand there's a tremendous amount of boogeyman fear by many Americans, fact is, you can't stop evil from happening. So your idea of a 3D printer, yes, it's possible. How many low-level criminals are going to go out and buy a 3D printer, much less have the technological know-how to print out a gun? Very little. And if they had that kind of technological know-how and that kind of capital to put down on a 3D printer, what do you have in your house that they could possibly want other than just
real quick
evil murder, right?
I want to add this in real quick. So I just bought this laptop and it's not a super fancy laptop, but it comes with 3D printing technology so that I can design whatever I want on my laptop, and then I can go hook it to somebody else's 3D printer somewhere, and it'll automatically come off. And on top of that, I could get online and download all of the specs that to upload to my 3D printer, and then go somewhere and hook it up to a 3D printer and have it all made myself.
Yes, that's very boogeyman-ish. So assume that you did have the technological know-how to download the specs for a 3D printed gun, and assume that you then went and broke into, say, Emory Hospital, so you could use their 3D printer. It's going to take a good 4 to 5 hours to print out a 3D gun. So you're going to break in and hope you don't get caught for 3 to 4 hours while the gun prints. You see what I'm saying? That's just an illogical argument. Like I said, if you've got that technological know-how and the smarts to print out a 3D gun, are you going to use it to break into your neighbor's house to get a couple bucks in cash and maybe raid their fridge? I don't think so. Anybody with that kind of technological know-how is also going to know how to go out of the country and smuggle a gun back in.
Do you mind?
Yeah, go ahead, and then we'll move on to mental illnesses. Go ahead.
Yeah. Actually, I just wanted to mention my son has a laptop. He also got a 3D printer for Christmas 2 years ago. He's 15 years old. It costs $560. The laptop, I can't remember the exact cost of, but between the two, it would be under $1,000. To download the program to 3D print a fully plastic AR-15 that only is missing one metal pin to make it operational is $100. So for roughly $1,100, that's your startup cost. After that, you're only paying for the plastic material, and you would probably pay roughly $35 to $40 per AR-15 you printed off. My son's 15. He would be very capable of doing that if he wanted to do that. Now, your average AR is going to cost you at least $800 to $2,000. So to say that somebody wouldn't have the technological know-how, my 15-year-old has the technological know-how. And to say that somebody wouldn't put out the startup costs to be able to do that, well, there's lots of thousands of dollars to be made by doing so. And I promise you, cartels, gang members, drug dealers who want to protect their $10,000 worth of drugs that they're ready to sell would absolutely, definitely be willing to spend $1,100 to get started, and then $35 a piece for AR-15s.
But like I said, you're concerned about somebody breaking into your house with a 3D printed gun. I just don't see it happening. And my next rebuttal is going to be there's a lot of styles of 3D printers. And an AR-15 is a complicated and precise weapon. And I guarantee you no $560 3D printer is going to be able to print one out that actually fires. It actually can because AR-15s break down to a whole lot of small pieces. A lot of people call them Barbie dolls for men for a reason, because you can interchange so many things. It's almost like, dress up Barbie. So the thing is, you could definitely, on a small 3D printer, you could print the upper, you could print the lower, you could print all that stuff. You actually could. Well, we can agree to disagree because I've never seen a 3D printer at that price that could do that.
Yeah, and that's perfectly fine. We're not going to agree on
what I ask you to do to prove your point is to print out a 3D gun and prove me wrong, right? But right now, that sounds like a fairy tale to me.
Well, that's also illegal.
Yeah, and to your point, normally if you take away guns from law-abiding citizens are the only ones who are going to turn their guns in. All of the criminals who want to do illegal things with their guns are going to be the ones who don't turn their guns in, and all you're doing is just making it easier for criminals to get away with whatever they want, while law-abiding citizens are now unarmed. But before we go to mental illnesses, I did want to touch on the AR-15. Are there specific types of guns, Joe, right now, like an AR-15, that you think are still too dangerous or need to be taken off the market?
To me, anything greater than, say, a Glock or something, I mean, I'm saying if the gun fires more than, I don't know, 10 bullets in a minute, you've got a problem.
So that's just a matter of whether or not, I mean, again, like a Glock or any sort of handgun, that's just a matter of whether or not you can do this with, pull your finger 10 times within a minute, right? So if all guns are not rapid fire, we're already saying that legal guns have to be single fire guns, then literally every gun falls into the same category on whether or not you're able to, or how fast you're able to fire it.
I did not follow that at all. So there's a great difference between a machine gun and, say, a 6-shooter, right? What I'm saying is if you're getting a gun for home protection, you're likely not going to have to kill 50 people at once. And I'm also saying that if you do have a gang of 50 people coming at your house, you're likely not going to kill them all anyway, whether you've got a machine gun or not. So we're talking about home protection, okay? You're likely going to have to protect yourself against 1, maybe up to 5 people on a normal crime rate, not 50. So if you're buying a gun that can kill 45 people in a minute, then that's just not logical, right?
But
so
again, machine guns are already illegal.
500 times in a minute or not, which, I fired a gun, that's going to be a little bit difficult. It's an illogical argument. So we're going down a path of coming up with weird scenarios that people like to use to prove their points. And that's just what it is. It's a scenario you're grabbing out of the air to try to make your point. It's not a real scenario.
No, it's a very logical scenario that I can take any gun anywhere and fire it. As long as it's be able to load 10 bullets, I can shoot it 10 times within a minute. Their machine guns are already illegal is the point. And so any sort of rapid fire gun that's shooting numerous bullets with one pull of the trigger is already illegal. So all guns would fall into the same exact category, meaning every time you pull the trigger, 1 bullet comes out. And as long as you can pull the trigger 10 times within 1 minute, you're going to have 10 bullets come out, right?
So, Michael, are machine guns illegal?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, semi-automatic is legal, and semi-automatic means that 1 bullet pull comes out for 1 pull of the trigger. Machine gun means that once you pull the trigger and hold it, it's machine operated and it rapid fires without multiple pulls of the trigger. And I do want to get it. I know that there's, like you mentioned, if somebody wants to have a Glock, that's totally fine. That's different than an AR-15 because of capacity, correct?
That's right.
If you don't mind me showing, I do have an unloaded Glock in my hand. Is that okay?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead, man.
Okay, so this would be okay, right? Okay, I just do want to mention something. The average AR-15 magazine holds 30 rounds. This Glock holds 33. I can actually shoot this faster than I can shoot my AR. And I can also conceal it.
And are attachments to an AR-15 legal, like an extender?
Extended in what way?
For ammunition.
Well, you can, yeah, they are. You can buy 100-round magazines for an AR-15. You can buy 100-round magazines for a 9mm. You can any of those things. And to me, 100-round magazines, I actually cannot see any point in it. On the other hand, 30 to 40-round magazines, I absolutely can. And I'll tell you a very good example. I live in South Carolina, out in the country, and me and my 12-year-old daughter went camping. She knows gun safety very well. She shoots small guns, 22s, knows gun safety very well. And when we camp, I have trigger locks, on my guns. They can't be fired, anything like that. But we were doing a little bit of hiking on a friend's private property, and I did have my AR-15 pistol with a 30-round magazine in it with me. And we got surrounded by coyotes, by about, I would say 20 to 25 of them. And had I had a 6-shooter, it wouldn't have turned out so good.
Okay. Do you guys want to, if we can move on to mental illnesses, or actually, real quick, I do want to let you comment on this, Michael. Actually, when it comes to AR-15s, those are specifically for protection, right? There's different guns. We're not only talking about guns for protection. We're also talking about guns for hunting, or for hobbies. And so AR-15s, those aren't used in hunting. Those are specifically for protection, correct?
Yeah, actually, it's considered inhumane to use an AR-15. You can get specialized AR-15s that fire bigger rounds, or you could get an AR-10 that fires 308s instead of 223s. Because an AR-15, although the projectile moves faster than a 22, it's actually .223 caliber ammunition. So it's considered inhumane because in most cases, if you hit something the size of a hog or a deer, it's not considered a powerful enough round like a hunting rifle to humanely kill an animal. It's considered too underpowered.
So then, Joe, with that in mind, are AR-15s on your list of guns that should probably be banned?
Well, all I'm stuck on is that they're inhumane to kill an animal, and yet we're perfectly all right with owning them to kill humans. It's
Well, he's saying that it would
freaking me out, actually.
He's saying it wouldn't kill the animal fast enough because it's not strong enough. And so if you're talking about a gun that would actually hold a human off more so than just killing them right away, isn't that the ideal gun to use then?
There are no ideal guns to use. And I do have a question. How many of those coyotes did you actually hit with your gun? How many did you kill?
9.
And they continued to attack you guys even after you fired the first round?
Yeah, I fired, I would say, 12 rounds and killed 9 of them. And that's once I had killed 9, then they scattered away.
So if they continued to attack with that sort of noise, I would have checked to see if they had rabies. Did you take them to a vet or some kind of animal specialist to make sure they weren't rabid?
No, not at all, because there's a big problem with rabid coyotes in South Carolina. In fact, they're actually considering putting a bounty on coyotes because they're overrunning South Carolina so much. They're considering, already you can hunt coyotes year round. There's no certain season. You can hunt them year round, and you don't have to have a hunting license to hunt them because they're killing kids, they're killing farm animals, they're killing things like that. And in general, they tend to be rabid. But as far as whether they're rabid or not, if I had a revolver with, a 6-shooter, chances are, again, that wouldn't have turned out too good. And also, people do get something very confused. A revolver is a semi-automatic weapon. All semi-automatic means is that you don't have to cock or rack the firearm between each shot. All you have to do is keep pulling the trigger. And with any 6-shooter, 8-shooter, any kind of revolver, it is semi-automatic. Every time you pull the trigger, the wheel turns and it chambers up the next round for you to pull the trigger again.
Yeah, I think for her concern, I believe, with a 6-shooter is that it holds less bullets. Am I correct on that, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, there's no reason you should need that many bullets, but I can't find where there actually is a bounty. It says a bounty was proposed, but they nixed it.
Right. That's what I said. They keep bringing it back up. But if you look it up in South Carolina, there's no hunting seasons for coyote. It's year round. And like I said, this is about the 3rd time they've proposed it. So who knows? With politics, it could easily be a thing of they don't know whether they want to put out the money because they know a bunch of gun crazed nuts are going to go out dedicating 3 days a week to hunting coyotes, and it's going to cost them a fortune. Who knows what the reasoning really is. But again, like I said, since I had to fire, I would say 12 to 13 shots. If I had a revolver that only held 6 shots while I was reloading that, there's a very good chance my daughter could have been killed.
I also see that there's been one coyote death, and that was a Fort Mill, South Carolina man, not a bunch of children. I mean, I have to think that we'd have heard about it if coyotes were killing children in South Carolina. So I like to deal only in facts. And I mean, I understand the danger. Frankly, I would have killed what I would have had to kill for my kids as well, but I prefer we only stick to facts. So the coyote story was a good example of needing protection, but it doesn't necessarily look like there's a real huge problem other than they're overrunning the state. It doesn't look like they're killing anyone. And coyotes normally don't continue to attack once the aggressor seems to have the upper hand. They would have had to been coordinatingly trying to kill both you and your daughter. And rabid coyotes don't work in a pack.
Right. And I actually do completely agree with you, and I agree with you on something else. The same mindset would say that if because somebody's mental illness stops them from getting a gun, if that saves Billy down the road, even though that's just one isolated situation and that's just one child, it's worth it. Even if there's not, an epidemic of children being attacked by coyotes, if just my daughter, just one kid, is saved because I had something that I could protect her with.
Yeah, no doubt. I wouldn't. There's nobody that's going to blame you for killing a coyote. That was, heck, it would only have to show itself to me in my children before I killed it. But so the kid Billy down the street example, unfortunately, is a very real problem. We've had far too many deaths in recent years that could be prevented. It's horrible. And frankly, what's even alarming is that our government won't allow people to actually study it and agree on things. For instance, they've outlawed the CDC from studying gun violence precisely because it points to a real need for control. So there are a couple of sites out there, Everytown Research, Pew Research, and a few others, Gifford Law Research, that have some really alarming statistics that we should look at. So we should get on to mental illness because it's coming to the end of my day.
Gotcha. So when it comes to mental illness, my issue is normally that we can't always specify what illnesses mean that you shouldn't have a gun. So the last time I remember something being proposed, it had a lot of stuff about, what type of medication you have. And when it comes to whether or not you're in even like no-fly lists, shouldn't be able to buy a gun if you're on a no-fly list. And lots of times that has nothing to do with whether or not you've actually committed a crime. It has more to do with whether or not they just think you might do something bad, so therefore you can now not own a gun. Or if you're on Zoloft or Xanax or something like that. I know so many people who would now have their rights taken away, I guess you could phrase it that way, because of the medication that they take. And it doesn't mean that they're necessarily crazy people. It just means that that they have some sort of mental illness that would be that would mean that they couldn't own a gun anymore.
So if you're on Zoloft or Prozac, you likely don't have many problems. Those are drugs they give to people, that just have mild depression. But there are a list of drugs out there that if you're on it because you have some psychotic episodes. These are the people that we need to take a look at. Now, I don't have all the answers around the mentally ill thing. That's going to take some talking about. I do agree with the no-fly list. Hell, my own father got put on the no-fly list and nobody ever figured out why. But there's a ton of antipsychotics. Bipolar is a diagnosis. I wouldn't want anyone to have a gun. I myself have been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and I got to tell you, had I owned a gun, I'd either be dead or in jail. Because the very definition of those type of people, they absolutely lose control of themselves when they get into stressful situations, or they come across some kind of an acute stressor in their life. Okay. So yes, we can qualify at some point. Where that qualification ends, you never know. Like, you just don't know. And that's something people who are trained in mental illness, more than you or I or Michael might be, need to contribute to that conversation. But I will say that I'm positive we can come up with a list of mental illnesses or a list of people on certain drugs that don't need to own handguns. Now, the concern there is, if you're on that list, who has access to that list, and will an employer discriminate against you? So there's a lot of concerns around having a list like that. So it would have to be under heavy security, whatever. But again, I do not have a degree in psychology. I don't think you or Michael does. So I don't think we can sit here and determine who's too mentally ill to own a gun. But I think we can all agree that there's plenty of people too mentally ill to have a gun or get access to guns.
Yeah, I think it's more of the slippery slope argument when it comes to once you start saying who can and can't have a gun based on how you believe their brain might be working, because there's also misdiagnoses out there that could actually, affect somebody on whether or not they're able to arm themselves. Michael, you want to speak to mental illnesses?
Yeah, absolutely. I have no psychology background. You're absolutely correct. I'm a carpenter. I know how to build things. But no, one thing that I would say is, as far as mental illness, that, like you said, Tom, that's a very slippery slope, because there are people who are mentally ill who shouldn't have access to guns and also shouldn't be allowed to drive vehicles. And there are people who are not allowed to drive vehicles because of specific mental illnesses. That being said, I would like to pose a question. One of the mental illnesses that was proposed to prevent you from being able to buy a firearm is PTSD, if you're prescribed to Xanax or some kind of benzodiazepine for PTSD. So my question that I would pose is, say you have a guy who served 2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 tour in Iraq. He comes home, he goes to the VA, he tells the VA doctor that he's having PTSD. He's still a sane individual. He's not a murderous, rampageous person. But would it be fair to then tell that person who went and defended our country, that, look, because you came back with PTSD, you no longer have the right to own the means to defend yourself the same way that I do. I never served the country. And I believe that person has, if not as much, probably more right to own means of defending his family, himself, things of that nature. So it is absolutely a slippery slope. And I do actually know quite a few veterans who have told me they're terrified to talk to the VA about PTSD, because they know there's a very good chance that if it gets documented, they'll no longer be able to own a gun. So do you think that the fact that somebody has nightmares in the middle of the night about war, about, lives they may have taken, things like that, do you think that should give them less right than me to have the means that I have to defend my family?
I think that it's not black and white. Frankly, I also have a diagnosis of PTSD. I've had a pretty rough life. There are different levels of PTSD, and you can walk into a VA and say you have PTSD because you're having nightmares or you're having this or that. Real PTSD presents in certain ways. Now, these people, I'm not saying they're not traumatized, because God knows they have every right to be. I'm saying that if you go into a psychiatrist's office and tell them you have PTSD or you suspect you have PTSD, they will know for sure if you have the type of PTSD that's going to cause you to have a psychotic breakdown in the middle of a Walmart, right? There are different levels. If you duck and cover when fireworks are going off, that's a whole different level of PTSD than if you're in a parking lot, you hear a car backfire, and you drop down and reach for your gun. So there's a whole huge gray area, especially with PTSD. Yes, some individuals with really rough PTSD, and I'm not one of them, I have a mild form of it, they do not need to have a gun. And it is sad, right? It is terrible that we should keep them off the list, right? But if it saves lives, even their own, because you got to imagine if they freak out and start shooting stuff up, they're putting themselves in a lot of danger as well. So one of the tenets of the world is know thyself. Like, I'm going to tell you straight up, I have no business owning a gun. I'm a very, what's the word for it? Passionate woman, right? I have no business owning a gun. And people need to be real with themselves. It's not cool to own a gun. It's not sporting to collect a ton of guns that you don't need. Guns are a tool and should be used as a tool. They're not fun. They're not something you collect and say, hey, look, I have a tremendous amount of guns here. I'm a cool dude. It doesn't work that way. You own some tools. You need to know how to use those tools. And those tools don't belong in the hands of just everybody.
Yeah, I think when it comes to collecting guns, we should probably have maybe some regulations on whether or not they have firing pins in them or something like that. If you want to say, hey, this is just for collection, we can kind of change the rules for some of those things. I personally am also a passionate person. I get heated pretty quickly. I stopped wearing headphones when I play video games because sometimes I will have a troll in my ear and I will go check my bank account to see if I can get someone to hack into their Xbox or PS4, find out where they live, see if I can still use some money to fly over to their house and show that little 13-year-old girl who's boss. So maybe, but I have time to cool down while I'm trying to do all of this math on my fingers and toes. And maybe I won't have enough time to cool down if all I have to do is just load up a magazine and before I go do something stupid. And whether I have the rights to do it or not, sometimes it's better that I just don't have the ability to do it whatsoever. I know that you got to go, Joe. If anybody else wants to call in, go ahead and do it while we kind of finish this up, and we'll take your calls. But you got anything else on that, Michael?
Well, I mean, I would definitely say that if Xbox Live would make you consider buying a plane ticket and going showing a 13-year-old who's boss, you probably would. Did I lose you there?
No, he just changed the screen, it looks like.
Yeah, you're still going.
Okay, I was gonna say, yeah, that probably, should be documented, and maybe that would be the type of person who shouldn't own a gun. Only joking. I don't really think you would fly to somebody.
Wow, Tom, thanks for making the point. No, and this is the very reason that gun control advocates are asking for a nice long window, a nice long waiting period. Because if you're the type of person that gets enraged, especially if you get enraged quickly and know that if you have just a few minutes to cool down, you're going to cool down. I have what they used to call an Irish temper. I get super mad real fast, then I get super unmad real fast. So having a waiting period is not a bad idea, especially if we start being honest with ourselves, right?
Yeah, and I definitely see everybody's points, and I think this is an important conversation. I think that who owns a gun is important. It's just very, very difficult to draw a line somewhere. Right now, we have all sorts of speculations coming out as to why people end up shooting others. And sometimes it's something as simple as video games. Sometimes it's mental illnesses, but we don't know which mental illnesses. But sometimes they're saying, hey, it's really just a societal or cultural problem in America. But if you look at all of those groups, 99.9% of those people who are partaking in those things are not actually going out and shooting people. And so we have to pin it down to exactly what the issues are and where they are. These kind of things, they say, will lead to a civil war, especially the polarizing issues that we have in politics. And I would say we're already in a civil war right now. This is a guerrilla war. This is guerrilla warfare. back and forth, left and right, Democrat and Republican, going out and doing crazy stuff so that they can publish a manifesto to fix the world, so that, the whole world can read their manifesto and magically we all understand what the problems are in America and what it is that we need to do. So these are very important issues, and issues that lots of people just refuse to talk about. So I appreciate you guys coming on and having the conversation.
Well, I do want to speak to the video game thing. So there's a lot of stuff out there, especially on right-wing sites. I'm not going to hide the fact I'm left, right? But especially on right-wing sites, you want to blame everyone but the culprit. So I'll leave you with this. The El Paso shooter wasn't quoting Grand Theft Auto or Fortnite. He was in there screaming direct quotes of our president. So we have a lot of problems in that people don't want to be honest with themselves about what the issues are, because that realization might go against what they've been ingrained to believe. I'm saying stop reading nonsense and do your own research to figure out what should or should not be in place here, right? Listening to speculation and opinion is a dangerous, talk about a slippery slope. So we live in an age where misinformation is the norm. And Tom, you're right. It's already devolved into a civil war. And historically speaking, a society that gets to this point is either going to crumble or they're going to make drastic changes. And it normally doesn't go well when a country gets to the point we're at. It just doesn't.
Anything else, Michael?
Yeah, actually, I wanted to mention just two things. One thing is something that Joe had mentioned earlier when she said about, a month standoff hostage situations. One thing that I would say about that is if, for example, there are 2 criminals and they have 15 hostages, if, say, 5 of those hostages are legally concealed carrying, that could actually end that scenario much faster. But the other thing that I wanted to say is that I think Joe's absolutely correct. I think that politics have become way too extreme, and people are absolutely forced to, if you're on the right, you have to be pro-gun. If you're on the left, you have to be pro-abortion. You have to be certain things. And people get their information from social media, and it's usually not factual. They take it as fact. They spread it around. Millions of people take it as fact. And another big problem that we have is I think that people on the left and the right, not to say that I'm on the right, because I'm actually not on the right. I might come off that way in certain aspects, but I actually lean left very far in a lot of ways. As a matter of fact, my oldest son's homosexual, and I'm very, very proud of him, where right-wing people might not be so much. But what I'm getting at is that it seems like somebody who's right-wing and somebody who's left-wing can no longer have a conversation and a disagreement and actually take each other's points or points of view seriously without calling each other either terrorist sympathizers or Nazis. And that's not the way America should work. We're all Americans. It doesn't matter who you vote for. We're all Americans. We all want the best America possible. We might have different opinions on how to get there or, anything like that. But I think that it is important that people that don't 100% agree on certain things do listen to each other and take each other's points into consideration. Because if you look on the right, most people on the right believe that everybody on the left wants everyone's guns confiscated, and that's the end game. That's what they're pushing towards. And a very lot of people on the left believe that everybody on the right believes that nobody should have to have background checks. You should be able to own a tank with fully automatic Gatling guns, on it, or Gatling guns strapped to the hood of your truck. And most people on the right don't necessarily believe that. The problem is the reason that we gained our freedom when we broke away in the Revolutionary War is we didn't like the idea of certain people saying how it would be and them getting their ways. We were very, very happy with the idea of everybody having a vote and everybody's vote counting equally. And now it seems as though everybody has to have their way, and it's either their way or it's wrong. And that's exactly what our founding fathers fought guide to get away from, which was royalty. Just certain people getting their way all the time, no matter what anybody else's opinions are. So it's very, very important for everybody to take each other's opinions into consideration. And if it turns out that 54% of America disagrees with me, then I have to just suck it up and say, well, you know what? That's the way America works. That's why we're the greatest country in the world, because that's what we do. We do what the majority wants. But the problem is, and I think on both sides, people don't want what the majority wants. They're not happy with their one vote. They want what they want, and everybody else is wrong. And they're not willing to listen to anything.
Our founding fathers were definitely against the party system because they saw how it broke the United Kingdom's government. A party system has never resulted in a successful government. Parties contributed to the fall of Rome. And when the founding fathers, there's a number of speeches and a number of papers written by them specifically telling us not to indulge in the party system. And yet we have people who join these parties, and then if they get emails and they get this and that, well, you better vote this way and you better vote that way because that's what we're all doing. And people aren't taking a moment to know what they want, whether it goes against their party or not. Know what you want and what you believe in, and to hell with this party system.
Yeah, I watch a lot of left and right media. Mostly I watch left media, but because I'm on the right, I already know what opinions I have, and I want to hear where I might be wrong. I want to hear what they have to say and make sure that there aren't holes in my thought process. I already want to know what my arguments would be towards that, if I have any. Because if I don't have any, then I need to just go ahead and take their opinion. But I'm going to watch right and left media and then go do my own research right after that to see what's factual and what's not factual, and move in that direction. But all right, I appreciate you guys coming on.
Well, thanks for having me. Michael, it's nice to make your acquaintance.
Oh, it was very nice making your acquaintance too, and I'm glad we were able to have this discussion, without any kind of disrespectful anything. I definitely respect your views. We're both Americans. We're entitled to our views, and we should definitely be able to voice them without being ridiculed for them.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
All right, fools. We'll see you guys later.
All right, you guys have a great night.